Hello everyone, my name is Minus, and I welcome you back for a second video breaking down a roguelike class across various MMORPGs. With Guild Wars 2 in the rearview mirror, today I'll be taking a look at EverQuest 2's Assassin class. Now before I jump right in EverQuest 2, it's sort of interesting because there are a selection of classes in which they define as rogues as a possible two classes, which are Swashbuckler or Brigand, while also making the Assassin class available as part of their Predators classes. I've played as Swashbuckler in the past and wanted to give the Assassin a go as it seems the most aligned with what I like in regards to rogue classes, but please note there are other rogue options in EverQuest 2. Of course, I feel the need to make sure anyone who's checking this video out understands the concept of our MMORPG Classes 101 videos, as Draq, Therek, NathanNapalm, and I will be playing the same base classes among multiple MMORPGs, looking for what we think is the best implementation of the classes that we love. Please know that in the time playing this class, we will not be experiencing everything the class has to offer, but can still get a feel of what the game is trying to achieve. It goes without saying that these videos are highly opinionated, and we look forward to hearing your takes on these classes in the video comments. If you didn't watch my last video or are unfamiliar with my content, the base things I look for in a well-implemented rogue class is meaningful stealth play, useful utility, poisons, and strong dagger play. Sure, a rogue can be great without some of these things, but these are what are most important to me. So with that said, let's grade the EverQuest 2 Assassin. The most important lesson is it's not a rogue if it doesn't use daggers.
Remember, wizards, when it comes to fireballs, size does matter.
Alright class, settle down. It's time to learn to die like a ranger.
Jimmy, get the glue out of your mouth. Today we're going to be talking about the eternal honor of the Paladin.
Attention class, please be seated.
Let's start by giving an overall official description of the Assassin class as provided by EverQuest 2 directly. The Assassin is the master of sinister strikes and opportunity attacks. They are exceptionally skilled at surprising unwitting opponents, and they suddenly strike and inflict massive damage. Assassins are known for using deadly poisons to debilitate their targets before finishing them off." End quote. So EQ2 Assassins are certainly all about attacking from stealth and shifting in and out while they're weakening their foes for big strikes. So this description, although short, describes the class quite well. We'll talk a lot more about this when we get into combat later in the video. Now, Assassins can use up to chain armor. This is something in EverQuest 1 that they did, and now we're seeing it again in EverQuest 2 for the Assassin. I'll admit I really don't like the use of chainmail for roguelike classes, and originally Pantheon was going to do the same, but has since changed the max armor type for rogues to being heavy leather, which I think is an outstanding decision. I understand the argument that chainmail isn't necessarily loud or clinky, but I do just think that when you envision in a rogue sort of slipping out of the shadows or into the shadows, it just works better with leather. So when it comes to weapons, Assassins can use swords, axes, spears, rapiers, daggers, bows, and thrown weapons. And they're also able to dual wield an aura class which can activate crafted poisons to lace into their attacks. So overall, armor and weapons are pretty good, and I don't have a whole lot of complaints about them, but as you know, I'm all about leather and daggers. So in grading the Assassin, we're going to start with combat. So if you've never played EverQuest 2, the most important thing to know about this game is that in its combat, there are a ton of abilities for every class. The Assassin class is no different, and not very far in my journey, I had 3 full bars of abilities and found it hard to get out the hotkeys that I would need for all of them. The good news is I immediately dropped all of my ranged abilities off my bar to play the class the way I wanted to, and it worked out pretty well. Through level 35, I had a wide range of attack types from straight damage to damage that also weakened enemies' resistances or just took their overall defense down so that they took more damage. We had bleed effects, stuns, and of course, poisons. For base attack abilities, I often found myself playing whack-a-mole with whatever ability was up to maximize my damage. It's not great, and after a few play sessions I realized that with all the different cooldown timers and the fact that I never ran out of my combat resource, I could honestly just click whatever ability was up for my basic attack rotation. Of course, some abilities did more than others, so what I decided to do was create a macro that prioritized about 10 different attack abilities to one button, and wow, did that make my life a lot easier. Now, I know a lot of people don't like doing things like this, but since the game has so much bloat in its ability totals, I felt like after making this macro, the combat actually felt much better, and this allowed me to strategically set up my hotkeys and modifiers so that I could execute abilities cleaner, especially those that required stealth. Now, this is where the Assassin really had some great, meaningful stealth combat. First, I'm sure there are other games that do this, but it was really neat how often you could go in and out of stealth as a rogue in EverQuest 2. First, you have two different stealth abilities that can be used during combat, of course if you're not being attacked or targeted. In the group setting, this meant that my large stealth abilities, when they were off cooldown, I had many ways to get back into stealth to use them. Your basic abilities of stealth and stalk, which by the way also decreases threat, have slight casting times to get into stealth, while your ability Masked Strike allows you to attack an enemy from behind and drop immediately into stealth. Now, Masked Strike was a great ability that I used to make sure I was always keeping my biggest stealth attacks on cooldown. While at times I would use basic stealth or stalk to get into stealth, typically Masked Strike usually was off a cooldown, often enough to be my main go-to for landing stealth attacks. The stealth attacks are heavy hitters and it felt great. Now, I'm only level 36 as of this video, but I didn't get to my ultimate stealth attack, which was known as Assassinate, which deals a ton of damage. But my go-to high damage ability was Mortal Blade. This ability hits like a truck compared to most abilities I've seen thus far in the game, and would chunk bosses even in our dungeon runs when it was up. Yes, it had a long cooldown, but it was very satisfying to land, and it also meant I would surely lead the DPS meters if I was able to get it off in any given fight. I also had Eviscerate, Jugular Slice, and Ambush to keep the flow of stealth attacks going during the fight. There was also a couple AoE stealth attacks, but the way I was playing this class, it really thrived much more in a single target fight and was almost unmatched by any classes in the groups we were playing. As noted before, a lot of the base abilities I put into the macro would help me increase the damage taken by the enemies, cause bleed, poison my foes, so I had a lot of debuffs constantly rolling on the target as I was dishing out major damage. As it should be, it's worth noting that there was a large damage decrease when pulling aggro or not being able to be behind a target. However, in group play, the Assassin's combat pattern really thrived behind the target, and you could really also specialize a lot of things here, and I could also go into a ton about AA points and how they are distributed across various loadouts and abilities, but I'm going to talk a little bit more about the AAs when we get to the identity alignment section. So I really enjoyed the Assassin's combat greatly, again especially when I macroed all my non-stealth attacks to one button, which allowed me to have better hotkey alignment for focusing on getting my stealth attacks off cleanly as they came off cooldown. My performance went up as well, not just my enjoyment. It allowed me to interact a bit more while playing too, which helps the social aspect of MMORPGs. So while some may not like macroing like this, I kind of feel like it was almost needed to enjoy the game. Now, with my playtime on Assassin, I'd give the combat currently an A-, as it's featuring great dagger play, poisons, bleeds, debuffs, and some awesome stealth play. The only reason I can't give it higher is because the massive bloat of abilities, which I feel like they could just work on combining as you level, so you just don't have so many freaking buttons to press. I can't imagine getting to a level 100 as there's still a ton of new abilities that I'm going to get, not just upgrades of the ones I have. It makes my fingers hurt just thinking about it. So whereas combat for the rogue is highly advanced and features a ton of abilities, at times being overwhelming without the use of macros, the utility side is slightly less obtuse. The rogue has two different stances at this level, one to add a bit more defense for the sake of offensive output, and another to sacrifice defense for more offensive prowess. Of course, the group I was in, I turned on Villainy, which increased my attack greatly into my overall agility. And another click it and forget it ability was Whirling Blades, which decreases my defense but increased the damage of my weapons so that it could proc additional damage on my attacks. Assassins also feature the ability to snare targets with caltrops, which I honestly never really used. Had a stun attack, which was very helpful for solo play because you could technically stun a target, run behind it to Mask Strike, drop into stealth, and execute a stealth attack if you were fast enough to do so. In group play, the stun attack was okay, but seldom in need. Assassins also have an evasion cooldown, which was useful if you were getting a little too much aggro on a target or in solo play. Perhaps the best ability out of the smallest utility abilities was Murderous Design, and this allowed you to transfer some of your threat to another player. This was very helpful to keep aggro on our tank and was a noticeable difference when it was on or off. While you could easily talk about different stealth abilities as utility, they play so much into combat that I almost look at stealth as more of a combat ability than a strict utility. Also, with the way the classes are tied to main categories as a predator, the assassin actually has access to tracking, which is typically a ranger-specific ability. Now, I'm not gonna lie, it was really nice to have this add-on to the repertoire and really made the scouting aspects of being an assassin really cool. But it's not a common rogue ability, and while it was really nice to have, I just don't see a lot of games offering this ability to the rogue, especially when they have a ranger in the game. So that said, I wouldn't complain if a game did it, but I don't think it's a core staple of a rogue gameplay. Finally, I've not really seen a lot of movement abilities, and I would have liked to see more. However, once you do get high enough into your alternative advancement points, the rogue does get Shadow Step, which can help that out a little bit. It just would have been nice to have something to get in and out of combat maybe a little earlier in your leveling, but it's not a game breaker. The class isn't heavy on utility as a separate entity of its combat play, but as stated before in the combat section, you do apply a lot of debuffs on your target, which ultimately help other party members. Overall, the utility is solid, you just don't have things like traps, a lot of good CC, lockpicking, and things like that. The assassin is much more of a combat-heavy variation of a rogue class than what we see currently in Pantheon, for example, or what you will see in Dungeons & Dragons Online soon. Overall, I'd give the utility a B. The utility score sort of plays itself during combat, but the few secondary abilities aren't bad. I would just like to see it have a little bit more flavor outside of combat. So in pace of play, can you tell yet that this class is a little bloated on abilities? So without the macro, I'd say the pace of play was not much fun. I found myself just staring at hotbars while clicking a total of 15 different abilities with different cooldowns to come off immediately as I was able to. The combat resource really seemed worthless as I never really had a period of time where I had to conserve energy or anything like that. However, once I got the macros set up, taking 10 buttons into one, then I could focus a lot more on properly executing my stealth attacks while I sort of just mashed the one key on my mouse. I made it so I could focus a lot more on my character while playing and also socialize a bit more. So I'm sure you'll get some people out there that hate having so many abilities programmed into a macro in priority order like that, but again, I just kind of felt like it was a necessity to enjoy the game. I'm not against macroing as long as the class still plays well, and while most of my attacks were on one button, the core elements of stealth and stealth attacks were still strategic, so it didn't become a bore fest. I will say though, daggers had a 4-second cooldown on their auto attack, so when abilities were down or I was waiting for things to come off cooldown, the auto attack felt very slow. So with the macro setup, I would have to give the pace of combat maybe a B. I think it helped it a lot. Without the macro, it probably would have gotten a lot lower. I felt like I could socialize, be strategic, and focus more on what was happening on the screen while still being able to pump out some strong damage. In the category of identity alignment, as I said in the intro to this video, I look at stealth play, poisons, utility, and daggers when looking at what I truly want out of a rogue. The EQ Assassin is a quintessential combat rogue, let's make no doubt about that. The stealth play in and out of combat is great, and the attacks from stealth are devastating game changers, and while I miss traps and some of the little tricks of the trade that can come from the rogue class like picklocks, traps, sense traps, etc., the combat rogue is represented very well here, and the dagger play was awesome. Now, I can make a whole video on the AA system, and it would go on forever. Again, AA stands for Alternative Advancement, and there are a ton of ways to build your assassin. From enhancing specific abilities, like increasing the effectiveness of poisons, you can truly make this class how you want it to play. I often focused on enhancing my stealth strikes when I could, but you have a few different trees to increase assassin skills, shadow skills, predator skills, etc. To me, this is a big positive in identity alignment because while I want a rogue to play a specific way, I can do that, but you can do the same and have different goals than me. Having the ability to build a class in the way you'd like is a very big deal, so big props to the extensive customization here, and I really hope that Mastery can play into this with Pantheon. Understanding how the game is played and how the assassins fit, I think its identity is pretty strong, so I'm going to give it an A, where the only thing I'd like to improve a little bit again are those out-of-combat tricks that I'd like to see more of. So what can Pantheon learn from the assassin class? So with what we currently know of the rogue class in Pantheon, I would say they are leaps and bounds ahead of the assassin when it comes to utility and support. The Pantheon Rogue can get groups out of trouble, scout and help with pulling, and truly lead a group. When it comes to this side of the coin, I'd say stay away from EQ2 Assassin in most cases. However, the Assassin has a big leg up from Pantheon on its combat at the moment. And it's not just because of different abilities they have, the huge arsenal attacks, but because how stealth interfaces into combat so well. I'd love to see Pantheon incorporate more in and out of stealth tricks for big stealth attacks, rather than how it's currently instituted. The Assassin feels very powerful in one-on-one combat, where right now the combat of Pantheon Rogue, in this very early stage, does feel a little less impactful. So I think Pantheon is setting the bar in utility and support a rogue can bring in and out of combat. I do think there are some things to learn here when it comes to in-combat stealth play. So now it's time for the overall grade, and it's important to note that the overall grade is not an average of the grades given to each of the categories. So with that said, I love the combat play, the in and out of stealth capabilities the rogue has. I love the impactful stealth attacks themselves, which really win the day here, and it's something I'd like to see Pantheon play more into. While the utility isn't great outside of combat, it's not bad either, so all in all the class plays very well and checks a lot of boxes for me into what I want out of a roguelike class. EQ2 did a great job with Assassin. I'm going to give it an A-. So what do you think? Let me know your experiences with the Assassin in EQ2, or if there's something different you would look for out of a roguelike class. So until next time.